Hi, and welcome to the Firmware Emotive Podcast, and you're listening to John Kai Herbert. And in this episode, I'm going to do a character analysis on Bill Gates. Now, he's seeing a lot of attention at the moment and a lot of hate, and I feel like understanding maybe some of his background might give some clarity into who he is and why he's doing what he's doing. Now, character analysis I've spoke about previously in another podcast around sexuality. For this example, again, I'm going to talk about the different types. So you've got like schizoid, rigid, masochistic, oral, and the psychopath. And referring to these is kind of a pejorative at the moment. I feel like it's when you label with someone with these, it doesn't really help them grow. And so in a clinical situation, like for me and my business partner, we don't use these terms to identify people. Again, it's like a therapist saying that you are depressed, you are anxious, or you are whatever else the DSM-5 has in store for you. Now, when I look at Bill, so I've got some pictures of Bill up on my computer here, and so for those on my look at my YouTube channel can see this. I decided to look at pictures of him from his childhood to try and get some gauge of like why I see what I see in his eyes now. So at a younger age, like I look at some of Bill's earlier pictures, and like he seems like quite a happy kid. Like there's an element of like joy and curiosity, and just like a love of life. And then it seems like when he starts hitting his teenage years, we start to see like a bit of a closure, like a little bit more disillusionment of the world, and then 20s and later, we start to see like he's like rising above his humanity in his eyes. Like I see like there's a competitiveness that I can see in his face. And I'm better than, like my mind rules. My mind is better than your mind, and then now I see in his eyes like a very distinct ocular block, which is associated with the schizoid character, which is what I see Bill is mostly. I see Bill has got a high degree of schizoid, a high degree of rigid, and then those two combined, he's got some psychopathy as well. So psychopathy or the psychopath is the fifth of the character structures, and they tend to be a hybrid of two of the others. And you have like an amplification of the two inside the psychopath. So to go into a bit more detail and how I got to my conclusion, I wanted to see how Bill walks, so how he moves and like how he gets around in his environment. So for me, it was really important for me to look at like where his pelvis moves, how his pelvis sits on his body, how he moves his arms, how he moves his eyes, how his head kind of sits on his shoulders, just to pay attention to like energetic splits and muscular splits. Like he doesn't really move freely. He's not a very freely moving being. And when I look at his skin, there's really not much color in his skin, and how he holds his hands, how he protects his heart whenever he's talking about something that feels heartfelt for him. So the spasticity and the rigidity in his muscles comes from like a fear of moving. When the schizoid has this, like when he was younger, his parents may have been a very hostile environment for him. He may have been a sickly child. The ocular blocks are very disconnected. So when you look into his eyes, you don't really see like he's there. It's almost like he's vacated his body at some point in his life. He's like, well, my feelings aren't important. I'm afraid to be in my body, which may have been tied to like him being bullied in school, or bullied by his parents, or just being tossed between his parents and not being able to to help find someone to help him navigate his emotional landscape. Now, he also looks like he has quite a shallow breath, so I don't see him as someone that breathes like deeply and slowly. In his stomach, like I feel like there's a lot of frozen energy in his stomach, and a lot of it's upwardly displaced into his head. So for a schizoid, there's a great temptation, and their defense is to go into their head. When their body isn't safe, they try and make sense of the world by reading or escaping into nature. So in spiritual communities, you'll find a lot of schizoids love being out in nature. They love dissolving themselves in nature because their body is scary. Being around people is scary. There might be an element of paranoia in him because of this, because there's a lot of fear there. That tends to breed a lot of paranoia, where like someone's out to get me, this is out to get me. There can also be like an element of it can be on the autistic scale, it's almost and a preference of fantasy over reality, and like this, the overall feeling that the world is unsafe and dangerous. Now, in this, underneath all that ways of escaping, there's a murderous rage of like towards maybe his parents or towards God or towards whatever he deems God, around not making his world feel safe. And he also might be able to intellectualize that he doesn't have any of this. But when you look into his eyes, when you look into his feelings, when you look into the way he moves, he just feels really fucking unsafe. And like for me, like I have a lot of compassion and empathy for that. Now, a schizoid will also be very prone to being taken over by entities and other beings. There's a hyperdimensional component here where when you vacate your body, you allow room for something else with a greater willpower to come in. Now, for Bill, I feel, and for schizoids in general, you can also channel in great ideas. However, the ideas might not always be from a benevolent source, something that wants to help humankind, help mankind. And I feel like I don't really know what his intentions are. However, by wanting to use vaccinations or wanting to push certain agendas, and by putting large amounts of money behind it, there's like not much transparency into what he's really feeling, and like I feel like people don't really trust someone that they can't feel. So if you're in like a leadership position, if someone can't feel your feelings or you aren't willing to express how you feel, then there's a good chance that they're not going to trust you, not going to follow you where you want to go. Now, if Bill came to me and his main structure issue was schizoid, or main diagnosis was schizoid, then I would start treating him with some grounding. Like I'd really want him to get inside his body. I'd really want him just to feel like what's going on, like in his body. I'd encourage him to do some body work. So, especially around the base of his neck, I feel like Bill would struggle with a lot of neck pain when he goes through. I'm just looking at this TED talk at the moment, just the terror in his eyes talking to people. It's quite unnerving. Like I feel for the guy. So the bodywork wise, just helping him feel all the tension and the rigidity in his motion, and allow him to let out some of that murderous rage, like some of that rage about feeling unsafe that's trapped in his body. And I'd possibly also do some womb regression. Now, why I speak about the womb is I also happen to look at his mother and applied a bit of character analysis to her too, and she looks like a very strong woman, very deeply in her masculine energy, like a CEO, business, entrepreneur. And the way I see it is that when Bill hit puberty, I don't think his sexuality was really nurtured. I don't feel like he was allowed to sexually express things. He was misplaced in a not misplaced. He's in a non-feeling family, and the only way to get love and admiration was to achieve. and that will dovetail into the rigid analysis, which I'm about to do. However, with his mum, like his mum doesn't have much feeling, so like I can see that her heart is quite closed. She was all about achievements as well, which possibly means that she had like an element of rejection from her sexuality. And then when I look at his father, again, big shoes to fill, and I don't really feel like his father showed him how to be a man either. His father and mother showed him how to be an entrepreneur, how to push and do things and not give up and succeed in a business sense. However, at an internal sense and a spirituality sense, I feel like there was no guide there for him. So, coming back into the rigid, there's always a competitiveness there, and that this is formed around like puberty age, where your sexuality is coming into being, and you're starting to ask some more questions, and you're looking for some more security in your sexuality. For rigids, there's a restlessness to achieve, and there may have been an absent opposite sex parent, and his father remarried at some point, so I feel like there would have been a lot of animosity towards each other in the family, the mother and father in the family, and not much love. And so the way Bill moves and walks and stands, his pelvis is pulled back, and there's a contraction around his buttocks, which means like he's not really, his creativity comes from his head and not from his pelvis. I'm just going to stop this TED talk here and jump over to the photos again on my YouTube channel. So what I see is, Bill just like his pelvis is pulled back, and so there's a lot of unresolved sexual repression there, which comes out it's a little bit of masochism. So around his gut, there's like a belly block around masochism. So he might eat or be unhealthy, like not maintain his body because of all of his repressed sexuality. So in order to escape that, he might eat. Sex is more of a responsibility as opposed to something that can be enjoyed. A lot of his interactions, this is still under the rigid, a lot of his interactions will be superficial. So he knows how to react. However, it's inauthentic. Like he knows how to dress in certain situations. He'll know how to speak in certain situations. However, underneath all that, the underlying mantra for his lower self is like the world is full of rejection and competition. And that comes out in his business. That comes out in how he carves his path into the world. And the way I treat that, again, is body work. I would encourage him to connect his heart and pelvis through bodywork, and allowing himself to surrender into this element that is not perfect. The rigids are always trying to look perfect in whatever that way that is, and for Bill, I feel like it was an intellectual endeavours, almost trying to look perfect for his mum and his dad, because that's how he got love, and love in the form of admiration from achievements, admiration for how much money, admiration for how much fame in that realm. So those two combined in Bill's case to form a psychopath. It's like a hybrid class. So you've got the passive feminine rigid male, and then you have the schizoid. Now what makes a psychopath is parents use the child as competition between each other. So parents want to try and compete with the child. They secretly don't want the child to succeed. A psychopath is also prone to bipolar because there's such a harsh split between the upper half of the body or lower half of the body, or multiple splits in the body. They can be prone to bipolar states. So in early childhood, there may have been some dangerous behaviour there for him, may have been considered dangerous, maybe a bit of a rebel, and he's also very skilled because his parents showed him how to compete with him, showed to compete with each other. He's got like a built-in, he knows how to divide and conquer in order to gain control. So he knows intuitively how to pit people against each other, and then the underlying lower self mantra in that is like, I must not give in. Everything is a lie, including love, including spirit, including me. So because everything he tried in order to get love from his parents wasn't real or was never came to fruition, he just believes that everything is a lie. So he spends a lot of his time making sense of the world through an academic or an intellectual lens, and I feel like you can't do that. Like you need to incorporate other components of your humanity and your spirit. And in the rigid and the schizoid, you have a high risk of betraying your humanity, where you don't feel like you are worthy, and then you don't feel like anybody else is worthy. Like you end up creating this lens of that you are worthy of life, and then psychopath components. I feel like he's the donations, and when he gives money, he's trying to compensate for the guilt that he feels within himself. There's a guilt that he feels about his endeavors. There's a guilt that he feels around, and shame around where he's got to. And this is quite common. The older you get, there's something that's called a death chest, which is where like you look inside, like your achievements of you open up like a chest of drawers or a treasure chest, and you look inside like, what have you done? Like, what is your legacy? You go, fuck, I haven't really like, what my legacy, I don't feel like it's enough. And so you feel like you need to donate or give from a place to try and offset a lot of this guilt. And I feel like that's where Bill is at the moment. And I feel like he's trying to compete with his mum and his father, his mum and his dad, where they were both philanthropists. And I feel like there's an element in the philanthropic community where you're trying to offset guilt. You're trying to offset shame that you were like a bit of a mercenary, bit of an assassin in how you achieved what you achieved in your life, and you're trying to give back in ways that seem right from the outside. Again, he knows what to do. He knows how to act. He knows how to behave. However, that's not really authentic, which is what I feel a lot of people feel is his inauthenticity. Now, another reason why I wanted to do this was in order to understand someone and have love for someone, you really kind of need to understand what their underpinnings are. And in a therapeutic setting, I found that's quite healing. Understanding that no one is really evil to the core. I feel like Bill really genuinely thinks that he's doing the best thing for civilization. He really genuinely, at a whatever the connection is between his heart and his head, that he says he's doing the right thing. And it might just be all head, like, oh, I've looked at the numbers, I've looked at the statistics, we need to flatten the curve of population. It requires a quality of life and prosperity, and that's a known statistic. Like when you help people survive and get over this barrier to entry of survival, then the population curve does start to level out. However, I feel like the way he goes about it, it's quite mechanical, and because people can't feel his heart, there's a distrust there. The epoch we're moving into is of leaders that are trustworthy from a heartfelt place. Now, so for those leaders out there that want to like criticize Bill and paint him as like this devil, I really feel like you're not looking at the devil within you, because there's a Bill Gates in all of us. There's this logical part of us that feels like we're doing the right thing. And I spoke about this in the End of the Mindset Era podcast, around like your mind is your friend and it isn't your friend. And your heart has an intuitive framework and an intuitive sieve that can work out, well, hey, you know what, my mind it does know a lot. However, my heart is where my intuition resides. My heart is where my humanity is. And I feel like as leaders moving forward, that's where we need to come from. That's where we need to speak from. So I encourage you to reflect upon what I've spoken about in this podcast, particularly including like Bill's past. Like his parents were not loving, heartfelt parents. I feel like they were purely around about academic achievement, purely around the only way Bill could ever get love and admiration was to achieve. So his inner child is crying, like crying out for some love and some admiration and some attention, and just to see him as a human being, as a child that is valued and is on earth to be loved for who he was, for all of his mistakes and his foibles, and he didn't need to go to the lengths that he did to try and get the love that he felt like he needed. So I feel like Bill has a lot of conditioning on him, and if I have clients that are similar, schizoid and rigid and in psychopathy, and for me it's encouraging them to trust me, and that they are here standing in front of me or online in front of me today because of their defenses. And like a schizoid is a defense, a rigid is a defense, and so is the psychopathy. Like you survive. These are survival mechanisms for your ego, for your identity. So you didn't kill yourself or implode from the crushing failure of your parents to not be able to nurture you as a human being. So I have a lot of love for Bill. Like I feel like he's in the era that he grew up in and the environment that he grew up in. There's no doubt that his heart would be armored. There's no doubt that he would live in his head. There's no doubt that there's a good chance that he gets downloads and inspiration from things that are otherworldly, from the hyperdimension. So he genuinely feels like he's doing the right thing. However, without that spiritual discernment, which we teach and which we help people in our business, you're not going to know where you're going. And it goes for all leaders, like that live in their head. Like you will get these amazing downloads and all these amazing ideas. However, if you don't have that heartfelt discernment, you don't really know where it's coming from. And it could be malevolent. It could be teasing you just that 1 degree off your soul's path. And over a 60-year lifetime, you could end up trying to want to force vaccines onto people, or wanting them to have a chip inside them so they can log, where you're at a health level. I also want to add, like, Bill's mother died of breast cancer, and his father died of Alzheimer's complications. So death is something that is very real for Bill, and I don't really feel like he's sat with it and acknowledged it. And particularly losing the ability of his mind. Like Bill's mind is his whole identity. So as soon as if he goes down his father's path, then there's a chance that he could get Alzheimer's as well. And I feel like he's terrified of that, and would spend any kind of money to try and get to a place where he doesn't need to be there. And I feel like he'll end up creating that because of the fear that's still inside his body, the fear that's trapped inside his body, the murderous rage that he can't feel because he's disconnected from his heart. And this doesn't mean he's not an amazing father. I mean, he has some children, and I feel like he's doing his best as a father can. However, I feel like his connection to the rest of humanity is not there, because deep down he feels like the world is unsafe and the world is a dangerous place. So he keeps his cards very close to his chest, which I see plays out in his schizoid and his rigid and his psychopathy. That's all that I feel like I want to share about Bill Gates. So if you got this far and you feel like you want to share it with someone, I feel like it's something that a lot of people want to share. Just have an insight into Bill, especially for leaders that just want to hate on him. Like I feel like I feel a lot of love, especially doing this whole process and looking at his childhood pictures and where he's come from and the energy how he's changed over time. I feel like it requires a level of empathy in order for you to understand the other, and when you can have love for the other, that is when the world will heal. That doesn't mean you need to ignore and not fight for your own, or be very strong have very strong opinions about your own identity or your own authority, and not abdicate your authority that, oh, well, he's in a position of power and he has money, therefore he knows more than I do. That's abdicating your authority. Feeling into your heart and seeing where he's coming from, actually making an attempt to understand that he is human. He is flesh and blood. You can heal yourself in that process too, and that has that ripples out into the rest of the world. So if you enjoyed this, again, share it, write a comment, rank it on whatever program that you're listening to, and I will see you in another podcast episode. Much love, and thank you for listening. Bye.